What happens when the people everyone trusts the most suddenly start getting named in lawsuits, interviews, and whispers that refuse to die? This year didn't just start loud, it started uncomfortable. And the names being dragged into it aren't random. They're powerful, protected, and publicly respected. Behind the polished interviews and carefully managed images, a wave of allegations has been quietly stacking up. Former collaborators, assistants, and insiders are coming forward, claiming things went down behind closed doors that the public was never meant to see. Some of these claims are tied to active lawsuits. Others are coming from people who say they stayed silent for years out of fear, money, or pressure. And here's the part that makes this impossible to ignore. These stories don't stand alone. When you line them up, a pattern starts to form, one that raises serious questions about power, influence, and how far certain people can go before anyone dares to push back. But this is bigger than just one name, and once you hear how deep it goes, it's hard to look at these figures the same way again. At first, this story barely made noise. No dramatic headlines, no viral clips, just a lawsuit quietly filed that most people would have scrolled past without a second thought. But once the details started coming out, it stopped sounding routine and started sounding unsettling. The lawsuit came from a musician who had recently entered a powerful inner circle. He wasn't a random name. He had national exposure, industry momentum, and had just been brought in to work closely with one of the biggest stars in entertainment. Touring, recording, private conversations, the kind of access most artists only dream about. According to the legal filing, that access slowly crossed into something else. The musician claims he was told their connection was special, unlike anything shared with anyone else. At the time, he didn't see it as a red flag. He saw it as mentorship, opportunity, validation. That's often how these situations begin. Then came the incident that changed everything. One night, after losing his hotel room key, he says he was locked out for hours. When the key was finally returned and he entered his room, something felt off immediately.
He saw that there were wipes left in his room, a beer bottle, a red backpack, a bottle of HIV medication with somebody else's name on it, an earring, and a hospital discharge paperwork belonging to a person that he did not know. Also, he saw a handwritten note that said, "Brian, I'll be back later, 5:30, just us, heart drawn, Stone F." When Brian saw this, he was terrified because he didn't know who left this in his room, and he was worried for his safety. He thought that maybe that person will come in later on and SA him. So he notified the hotel security. He made Will Smith's representatives aware of it.
But the reason why I'm speaking out about this is because getting fired or getting blamed or shamed or threatened or anything like that simply for reporting sexual misconduct or safety threats at work is not okay. And I know that there's a lot of other people out there who have been afraid to speak up, and I understand. And if that's you, I see you. And that's pretty much it.
Signs, he claims, that someone had been inside his room without permission. No explanation, no warning, just evidence that his private space had been entered. That's when fear set in. According to the lawsuit, he panicked, not knowing who had been there or why. He contacted hotel security, he notified representatives connected to his employer, he even went to law enforcement before requesting a new room. At that point, the issue wasn't fame or embarrassment, it was safety. And here's where the story takes a sharp turn. He began naming other powerful figures, other celebrities, other situations that, if true, would completely change how people view certain careers and public breakdowns. He spoke about mentorships that allegedly crossed lines, about young people who, according to him, entered spaces they didn't fully understand and came out damaged. At this point, it's important to slow down. None of what he claimed has been proven. No charges, no convictions, just allegations told through an interview. But the reason this moment mattered wasn't because people instantly believed him. It's because his story appeared to line up with something else already on the table, that lawsuit. The timing made people uneasy. A legal complaint describing fear, power imbalance, and retaliation, followed by a longtime insider saying this kind of behavior wasn't new, that it had been happening quietly for years. Suddenly, what looked like a one-off dispute started feeling like part of a much bigger picture. And once the internet made that connection, attention shifted to one specific name he brought up, a former rising star whose public unraveling had always seemed unexplained. And what he claimed about that situation was easily the most disturbing part of all. The name that shifted this from uncomfortable to disturbing was Bryshere Gray. For a lot of people, Bryshere's story never fully made sense. He rose fast as a breakout star on Empire, became a fan favorite, then seemed to spiral just as quickly. Erratic behavior, legal trouble, public meltdowns. Most viewers wrote it off as fame gone wrong. But according to the former insider, there was more going on beneath the surface. He claimed Bryshere had been brought into a powerful circle while he was still young and impressionable, introduced through trusted connections, promised guidance, protection, and career growth. On the outside, it looked like mentorship. On the inside, he alleges, the dynamic was far more complicated. The former friend said Bryshere's behavior began changing dramatically behind the scenes. Substance use, emotional instability, reckless decisions. At the time, people around him reportedly didn't understand what triggered it, until, according to this account, Bryshere allegedly broke down and claimed something traumatic had happened to him.
I said, what the F is wrong with you? And he was like, you know. He said, you know Will me. You know Diddy made me suck his penis. You know what's going on. You know Charlie made me suck. And I said, I have no idea what's going on. You said you were raped. And you said, Diddy made you suck his penis. This is what you told. I said, dude, this is criminal, right? So allegedly, he told me they took care of it. So whenever Charlie Mack came down, I think they gave him some money, whatever they promised him, right?
What was alleged next is extremely serious. The former friend claimed Bryshere told him he had been forced into acts he didn't consent to, involving powerful figures in the industry. Those claims have not been proven, and no charges have been filed related to them. Bryshere himself has not publicly confirmed this version of events. And that distinction matters. These are allegations shared in an interview, not facts established in court. Still, the reason people paid attention is because the claims attempted to explain something many had already noticed, a young actor unraveling in a way that didn't look random. The insider went further, suggesting that Bryshere may have been taken care of afterward. Promises, money, silence. Again, this is unverified and remains speculation, but it feeds into a broader question that keeps coming up in situations like this. When power and opportunity collide, how much choice does the less powerful person really have? Some listeners pushed back hard. They questioned motives, credibility, timing. Others argued that even repeating such claims without proof is dangerous, and they're not wrong. Allegations of this nature should always be handled with extreme care. But what made this moment linger was how it echoed language already seen elsewhere. Grooming, mentorship, blurred boundaries, fear of retaliation. Words that had also appeared in that earlier lawsuit. So even without proof, the overlap alone made people uneasy. Because if even a fraction of this were true, it wouldn't just be about one person's breakdown. It would be about a system that quietly chews people up, then lets the public blame them for falling apart. And just when it seemed like the allegations couldn't get any more extreme, the conversation shifted again. This time toward rumors so wild, even repeating them required multiple disclaimers. This is the point where the story stops being about lawsuits and starts testing credibility. In that same interview, the former insider began making claims so extreme that even people who had been following closely took a step back. He alleged the existence of recordings, not rumors overheard, not secondhand stories, actual tapes involving celebrities, power, and humiliation. According to him, these recordings were used as leverage, control, insurance. To be clear, there is no public evidence confirming these recordings exist. No footage has surfaced, no law enforcement confirmation. These claims live entirely in interviews and alleged book excerpts, and repeating them as fact would be irresponsible. But what made people uncomfortable wasn't just what he said, it was how confident he sounded saying it. He named high-profile figures, including Tyrese Gibson, claiming they were connected to these alleged situations. Again, allegedly. No proof, no charges, just claims. But once names like that enter the conversation, the internet does what it always does. It starts digging. Old photos, old captions, old trips, old jokes that suddenly don't sound like jokes anymore. One moment that got circulated heavily was Tyrese's past social media posts from overseas trips, which some people began interpreting through this new lens. On their own, they meant nothing. But combined with the interview's claims, they fueled speculation fast. That's how rumor cycles work. Context gets rewritten in real time. The former insider also dragged in other recognizable names, including Alfonso Ribeiro, making claims that, if true, would be criminal. These accusations have never been supported by evidence, and none of the people named have been charged in relation to them. And this is where the line has to be drawn. There's a difference between discussing lawsuits and repeating unverified allegations that could permanently damage lives. Even people who believe there may be truth buried somewhere admit this part of the story is impossible to verify right now. Still, the damage was already done. Because once these claims went public, the focus shifted from, is this true, to why do stories like this keep surfacing around the same circles? And that question didn't stay confined to one household or one interview. It spread straight into another powerful corner of the entertainment industry, where lawsuits weren't rumors, they were already stacking up. While rumors were exploding online, another name was already dealing with something far harder to dismiss: paperwork, court filings, attorneys, and a growing list of similar accusations. Tyler Perry has been sued more than once by male actors who claim their professional relationship crossed boundaries. The most recent lawsuit came from an actor who said he was invited into what looked like a career opportunity, meetings, conversations about roles, promises of future work, only for things to take a turn he didn't consent to. According to the complaint, the actor claims unwanted advances were made and that the power imbalance made it nearly impossible to speak up in the moment. He's seeking a massive payout, which immediately split public opinion. Some people saw red flags, others saw dollar signs. Because on paper, the numbers are eye-catching. The lawsuit asks for millions, which naturally led critics to label it a money grab. Tyler Perry's legal team pushed back hard, releasing messages they say show a friendly, appreciative relationship after the alleged incidents, including requests for financial help. To them, this proved nothing improper happened. But the accuser tells a different story. He claims money was given after the alleged incidents, not as kindness, but as silence. Again, this is his claim, not a legal conclusion. That's for the courts to decide.
When a very big director, a very seriously powerful person that everybody knows, invited me over to his house to talk about roles and upcoming things that he was writing. And then, guys, it happens. You know, my boundaries were crossed. You feel like this person feels like they got power over you because of the situation and the opportunity that presented itself in front of you. But Tyler Perry knows what he did, man. He knows what he did. The text messages that he released the other day, they prove that Perry was sending me money after Medea. The thing that you guys got to ask yourself is why? I'll give you guys more updates as soon as we get closer to the trial. The evidence that's going to come out is going to shock you guys.
Still, it raised a familiar question people have asked in other cases. If nothing happened, why were payments made at all? This lawsuit didn't exist alone either. Another accuser, Derek Dixon, filed an even larger lawsuit earlier, alleging similar behavior and backing his claims with what he says are extensive receipts. His case is still unfolding, but the similarities between the accusations caught people's attention. Then there's Christian Keyes. Christian has never formally sued Tyler Perry, but he's publicly hinted at experiences that made people read between the lines. In interviews and social media posts, he suggested inappropriate behavior and later implied he was pressured into silence. Some have claimed hush money was involved. That part remains unproven. What is documented is Christian's long-running dispute over creative credit and control of his own show. He's described feeling pushed out, marginalized, and professionally cornered. Whether those conflicts are connected to personal allegations is unclear, but together they paint a picture of tension that hasn't gone away.
This person is a predator, and he's one of several. And I have proof. It's not like I'm just making false accusations. The receipts, the recordings down to the police department, and let them hear this individual. I can press play and you can hear the person and you'll know immediately who the person is that's offering me $100,000 to strip. Yeah, I wrote the book and I wrote the show. I wrote the pilot. I created the show. I'm not mad about not being there no more. Because, the studio tried to steal my Creative by credit. You putting the show out there, but you're also the same studio, Tyler Perry Studios, that removed my Creative by credit. And I had to call a union to have them force TPS to put it back on there. So I'm not sad that my show isn't there anymore. After season 5, it won't be there anymore. I won't have to deal with that shady, corny kind of leadership over there that would dare. You got 16, 17 shows. I got one. Let me have credit. My contract says I get credit. Why, yo?
This is where the pattern conversation starts again. One lawsuit can be dismissed. 2 raise eyebrows. Multiple similar claims over time, even if disputed, force people to at least ask questions, especially when every accusation involves the same core issue: power, opportunity, and blurred boundaries. Still, it's important to say this plainly. None of these cases mean guilt. Lawsuits are allegations, not verdicts. Some claims may fall apart in court. Others may not. But what makes this situation impossible to ignore is that it mirrors something seen earlier in the video. A powerful figure, a career opportunity, a younger or less established person, and a moment where saying no could mean losing everything. And just when people thought the conversation couldn't get any heavier, it moved out of Hollywood entirely and into the church. By the time this conversation reached the church, it stopped being about fame altogether and started being about trust. The next lawsuit centers on gospel singer and pastor Donnie Mcclurkin, who is being sued by a former assistant and church member, Giuseppe Corletto. According to the filing, their relationship began in the early 2000s, when Corletto was in his early 20s and seeking spiritual guidance. At the time, he says he was struggling internally, torn between faith and identity, and believed he had found a safe place, someone he could trust, someone who understood trauma, because both men had spoken openly about painful experiences earlier in life. That shared vulnerability, he claims, created a bond that blurred lines. What Corletto alleges next is serious. He claims that during private counseling sessions, boundaries were crossed under the guise of spiritual help. that moments meant for prayer allegedly became inappropriate. These claims are allegations, not proven facts, and Mcclurkin has denied wrongdoing, stating that his former assistant is mischaracterizing a consensual relationship. The lawsuit also alleges that their interactions didn't end quickly. According to Corletto, contact continued for years, even after he stopped working for the church. He claims some encounters were consensual, while others were not. That distinction sits at the heart of the case and will ultimately matter in court. One detail that drew intense attention was an email Corletto says he discovered years later. In it, Mcclurkin allegedly apologized for behavior that crossed lines and acknowledged wrongdoing. Mcclurkin disputes the interpretation of that message and maintains that the relationship, while flawed, was not abusive. This is where opinions split sharply. Some argue that continued contact undermines claims of harm. Others point out that trauma, faith-based authority, and emotional dependency can complicate consent, especially when one person holds spiritual power over another. And unlike Hollywood, where contracts and careers dominate, the church adds another layer entirely. When faith is involved, walking away doesn't just mean losing a job. It can mean losing community, identity, and a sense of salvation. That's why this lawsuit hit differently. It forced people to confront an uncomfortable reality. Power doesn't only live in studios and boardrooms. Sometimes it lives behind pulpits, and when it's abused, allegedly, the damage can last decades. By this point, a pattern had fully emerged. Different industries, different roles, same themes. Silence, fear, influence, and people asking themselves the same question over and over. Why does it take so long for these stories to surface? By now, it's hard to pretend these stories exist in isolation. Different people, different industries, different timelines. Yet the same words keep appearing: power, silence, fear, retaliation. Not because everyone involved is the same, but because the environments they're operating in are. In entertainment and religious spaces alike, access is currency: a role, a tour, a blessing, a recommendation. When one person controls those things, the balance shifts immediately. Saying yes feels safer than saying no. Speaking up feels like career suicide, and staying quiet starts to feel like the only option. That's why so many of these stories don't surface right away. People wait years, sometimes decades, not because they forgot what happened, but because the cost of telling the truth felt higher than the cost of carrying it. NDAs, threats of blacklisting, reputation destruction, or simply the fear that no one would believe them. And here's the uncomfortable part. Often, they're right. Public reaction tends to follow the same cycle. First comes disbelief, then ridicule, then digging for reasons not to listen. And only much later, once multiple stories stack up, does the conversation shift to, maybe there's something here. That doesn't mean every accusation is true. It doesn't mean every lawsuit is honest. False claims do exist, and they hurt real people. But dismissing all claims because some may be exaggerated is how patterns stay buried. What makes this moment different is timing. Social media has removed gatekeepers. Lawsuits are public. Interviews live forever. And once one person speaks, it becomes easier for the next person to say, that happened to me too. Not because it's trendy, but because silence finally feels more dangerous than exposure. This is also where responsibility matters. Accountability doesn't mean canceling people overnight. It means allowing investigations to happen, letting courts do their job, letting evidence speak instead of fan loyalty or hatred, and recognizing that power, when left unchecked, will always be tempted to cross lines. So the real question isn't whether every claim in this video is true. It's why so many people from completely different worlds are describing the same experience. And that question doesn't have an easy answer. At the end of all this, there's one thing that needs to be said clearly. Allegations are not convictions. Lawsuits are not verdicts. And rumors, no matter how loud, are not proof. Some of these cases may fall apart. Others may never even reach a courtroom. That's reality. But ignoring why these stories keep surfacing would be just as dishonest. What we're really watching isn't the downfall of a few famous names. It's the slow exposure of systems that protect power first and people second. Whether it's a studio, a tour, or a church, the same rules apply. When influence goes unchecked, silence becomes the price of survival. That doesn't mean we rush to judgment. It means we pay attention. We listen without instantly choosing sides. We let facts matter more than loyalty, and evidence matter more than narratives. Because real accountability isn't about punishment, it's about preventing the next person from feeling trapped, scared, or disposable. Some of these stories may turn out to be exaggerated, some may be proven false. But if even one person was harmed and felt they had nowhere to go, that alone should make us pause. And maybe that's why these conversations feel so uncomfortable, because they force us to question not just individuals, but the culture that allowed silence to feel safer than truth for so long. That's where this really ends.